Okay, we're live.
Welcome everybody to another episode of SETI Live. And my name is Seth Shostak, and I'm pleased that so many of you have decided to tune us in while you're sheltering in place. We got an interesting program today. It's about looking for Martians. And I know people have been looking for Martians a long time. And whenever anybody at NASA says we're going to look for Martians, people sort of, their eyes glaze over because they've heard that before. But the experiment is really underway. And to talk to us about it today is Adrian Brown. And he's at NASA headquarters. He's the Mars 2020 Deputy Program Scientist, which, doesn't fit on his business card, but, it's impressive if it had. Adrian, welcome to SETI Live.
Thanks, Seth.
Okay.
Great to be here.
Well, look, let's get right to it. Let's start right at the top here with the crux of this whole thing. And that is the Perseverance rover now on its way to the red planet actually going to look for life on Mars?
Yeah, that's what we're designing it to do, or what's been designed to do. The rover is got an array of instruments, about 9 different science instruments that it's going to be unleashing on the surface of Mars to try and dig up some evidence of or biosignatures or something like that we can find in the rocks or in the soils of the landing site, which is a place called Jezero Crater.
Well, let me ask you. Let me just ask you there, right there. Looking for signs of life. I mean, is it looking for life? I mean, alive stuff, or is it looking for life that was there 4 billion years ago or something?
So we're not really thinking that there's going to be extant life that we're going to be picking up, although that would be really nice if we did. But the landing site that we're going to has a big delta in it that indicate that there was running water and a pond of liquid water there about 3.9 billion years ago. That was at a time when Mars was really different from the state that it's in today. There was running liquid water. It was sort of similar to what we think. It was sort of similar to the Earth at about the same time. And at that time on Earth, we now know we do have good evidence from the rocks in Western Australia, for example, where I've worked. We have evidence of what we call stromatolites, and they contain structures that determine for us that there's biology that was involved in making those rocks. Okay, so if we are able to find those sort of indications of stromatolites on the surface of Mars, and that is what a lot of the science team are actually interested in finding, then we would be finding indirect evidence of past life on Earth. I'm sorry, on Mars. So, and that would be a magnificent success for the rover.
Yeah, well, it might be worthwhile just telling people why that would be so interesting. I mean, we've gone to Mars. There's been Earth-made hardware on Mars for a very long time. NASA, to the best of my knowledge, NASA has not had a mission to actually look for life on Mars since the 1970s, the Viking landers. They spent a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of effort to get these 2 landers down onto the surface of the surface of Mars, and dig up some soil and, examine it for chemical activity and all that, looking for life. The verdict came back somewhat ambiguous, well, it doesn't look like we found anything, and everybody was kind of disappointed. And is that what has spooked NASA ever since the 1970s about looking for life directly? I mean, why has it taken so long?
Well, I think that you could view the Viking experiments as just a way to dip our toe in the water. We thought we were looking for life, but in fact, we were really looking for life that was very much what we'd expect in our backyard. And if it wasn't, then we weren't going to find it with the Viking equipment, unfortunately. So we were looking for things like carbon isotopes and stuff like that. But we really didn't have any clue about how the surface of Mars was being altered by, for example, gamma rays and all sorts of nasty stuff on the surface that really sterilized the surface. But now we've had an appreciation of a run of instruments and rovers first looking for the water, and then looking for habitability in the last Curiosity mission. But now this mission is really going to focus on the biological content of ancient Mars at a time when Mars was wet. And we haven't sent previous rovers to a place where there was consistently wet conditions for over tens of thousands of years, as there must have been at Jezero Crater, which is the landing site. So that's why we're hoping that it'll be that will be successful. And also, I should mention that this is just the first prong in what we call Mars sample return. So we have three elements that are going to constitute Mars sample return. So even if the rover itself isn't able to detect life in the rocks, we will be taking back samples from these ancient rocks that we'll then be able to analyze in our labs here on Earth at a much better and also much more advanced manner to try and look for further biosignatures. So things like, for example, the ALH 84001, and you'll recall a controversy in the early 90s regarding finding microbes in that asteroid from Mars, a meteorite from Mars. We wouldn't be able to detect those with our rover instruments. We wouldn't be able to detect those microfossils or putative microfossils that are now no longer thought to be microfossils. But we could using our terrestrial microscopes. And in fact, we can do a lot better now, and we'll be able to do a lot better in 10 years hence when the Mars samples come back.
Okay, let me sort of summarize the strategy here, because in the past, we talked about Viking landers. They land, they plop down onto the rusty surface of Mars, and they dig up some soil, and they pour chicken soup on the soil, and they look for chemical reactions. Hey, there are microbes in there, and it came back ambiguous. This thing, to begin with, it's a rover, so it's not stuck in one spot, right? It can. That's a good thing. Mobility counts.
Oh, yeah.
I have a particular appreciation for that in this sheltering in place environment. But the second thing is, by looking for dead life, which is in a sense what you're talking about, the remains of life that was there a long time ago, maybe that's a tremendous advantage over looking for live life. I mean, even if you were looking for humans, not that many people are, but if you were, right, there have been 100 billion humans on planet Earth since the beginning of Homo sapiens, and 7 billion, 8 billion, whatever it is, are alive today. So there are a lot more dead ones that you might be able to find the bones for. But okay, so having said all that, that's the strategy. I mean, it sounds like tremendous advantage. But what's going to happen is the rover is going to go around. It's going to say, "Oh, here's some rock where maybe there's some fossilized microbes or something in that," and I'll just package that up and wait for some other mission in the future, the second prong of this project, to come to Mars, pick it up, take it back to Earth, where we can analyze it a little more fully. Is that the scheme?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we'll be able to we've got on our science team, multiple hundreds of scientists who are geologists and biologists and astrobiologists who've worked in the field out in places on the Earth, looking for places in extreme environments where Earth life has occurred. And we find life everywhere here on Earth. But then on Mars, we haven't found it so far, but that is also because we've only looked in a couple of places, as you point out. We've only looked at a couple of sites. Then we're going to what we consider to be our most promising site for the age reasons and for the accessibility to water. In addition,
Can you tell us a little bit about that site? I mean, you mentioned it, Jezero Crater. Now, for people who haven't been to Mars, and that includes many in the audience, maybe you could tell us why that crater. I mean, it has an odd name and all of it, and it doesn't look all that impressive.
Well, yes, it might not look a lot of impressive, but it does to us, because what it has, it's a 45-kilometer crater. So we're not going to explore all of it, but we're going to land in the west end of it, which has a delta that's still preserved there. The delta has to be formed in a standing water environment, because it has to what happens is you have a river that flows into the delta, and as it gets to the edge of the crater, it slows down at the water surface. And when it slows down, any dust or entrained material gets dropped out.
Okay, now that river's not running now, just to be clear for everyone.
Exactly. So that
All
was
right, but how do you know it was running 4 billion years ago? I mean, we don't have any photos.
Well, we don't have photos of that process happening, but we've got photos of the the highest precision photos now of the delta, and we can look at the delta and we see these features basically that tell us that the water must have run through those channels. We see 2 channels. We actually see 2 deltas as well. In fact, we'll be investigating the bigger one, and then the delta has also, it has the ability to tell us a lot about what we call its watershed, all the places that the water has been. So we'll get in the part of the delta, we'll be able to investigate not just what's there on the delta, but we'll be looking at everything that the delta and its watershed have collected for us. So that gives us an immense advantage. We won't have to visit all these sites. We just go to the most important site, which is the delta, where everything should be collected. On Earth, that would immediately provide us with masses of life signs.
Well, I'm just thinking, you know, if somebody were looking for, I don't know, biology on Earth, you know, billions of years from now, I mean, you know, the descendants of the Klingons or something, they come to Earth, and maybe all of Earth's water is dried up for whatever reason. I mean, that will eventually happen, I think. Maybe they would go to the delta of the Mississippi River, southern Louisiana, because everything that the Mississippi River brought down from the central United States would be deposited there. So it's kind of the same approach, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And of course you get a human layer as well, which we're building at the moment. So you would be having all of the human history plus, you know, all of the Mississippi running history, which would probably go back millions of years, and you'd be able to investigate it. And that's our strategy here. And we're very lucky because the delta is still preserved and we can see it as a delta on Earth. That this delta is thought to be 3.9 billion years old. You ask why we know that. It is because it has craters on it that we can count, and we can date those. Well, we can say that those craters must statistically they come to, you know, a period in Mars's time, a period of Mars's history, which is about 3.9 billion years ago. And that's how we know that the water was running at that time period. And then we can say, well, that must have been when the delta formed. We didn't get any significant plate tectonics or anything like that to strip the delta away. There's no rains or anything like that to get rid of it. And so we had this thing that's been preserved for an amazing amount of time that we can investigate now with our cameras. And now with our rovers up close. Okay,
so the deal here is that on Mars, this kind of evidence doesn't get washed away by rains and covered up by plate tectonics and all that kind of stuff. Mars is a much better museum than the Earth is.
It is.
For its early history. Okay. So all right, I take it that what's behind you, by the way, Adrian, that isn't your water heater. That's the rover, right?
That's the last photo that was taken of the rover before it was packaged up and sent off. And of course, it launched successfully on July 30th. And now is 20 million miles away from us. And all the systems are checking out okay. There was a little bit of a glitch shortly after the launch, but it turned out to just be a temperature.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because, you know, we're going to go to questions here. And by the way, there are people watching here from Switzerland, Australia, Colombia, Germany, Earth, the UK, Italy, you know, the people all over the world. There are 3 from Mars. Let's consider, you know, how this is. Yeah, instead of doing this experiment, why don't we just ask them? You might explain, when does this thing get to Mars, and when does it get to Jezero crater? Because it doesn't land in the crater, does it?
Oh, yes, it will actually. Well, so yeah, that's an interesting topic in itself. So we are going there in February 18th, we'll be landing. It's a set date that we want to get right, because we have a lot of modeling that goes into the landing process. And so early on, they selected that date. So even though our launch date did slip a little bit, we've always stuck with February 18th, and we'll just get ourselves there, like, use the rockets to get ourselves up to warp speed 1 or something like that, and then make sure that we make the February 18th date. So it was chosen because we wanted to be able to simulate how the landing would take place in terms of dust, in terms of lighting conditions, in terms of what's the pressure in the atmosphere. Those sort of things are going to affect the parachute, for example. So we wanted to make sure that all the simulations that we were doing were relevant for that day. And that feeds into the question of, are we actually going to land in the crater? Because yes, it's previous missions have had these landing ellipses, and we've got them down. The engineers have got them down, down, down. And we have this system that is going to land autonomously. They call it the 7 minutes of terror, where we'll get the rover down onto the surface. In addition, that was just done with Curiosity, 10 years ago, and now we have the opportunity to do it again. But this time we're also including the most high accuracy map of the surface that's taken by our spy camera called HiRISE, that's on a satellite that's been there since 2006. And it's built up this amazing map that the computers on board, that's got a really fast computer on board the rover that's dedicated to working out where it is. And then if it sees that it's going up to a hazard, for example, landing on the edge of the delta or something like that, it has the ability to do a wave off and to land somewhere safer. So it's like the Neil Armstrong, because Neil Armstrong did the same thing during the Apollo 11 landing. But it's an onboard Neil Armstrong, if you will.
An onboard Neil Armstrong. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can get its autograph. All right. So it's going to actually land in the crater, and then it's going to start doing its samples right away. I mean, how long is it going to be there? I mean, I've always wanted to go to Mars, but I would probably require oxygen or water or food or something like that. This thing doesn't need any of that sort of stuff. What's the expected? How long is this mission that it's chosen to accept?
Well, so the rover, like Curiosity before it, it's powered by what we call an MMRTG, which is a multiple mission radioisotope generator. So it's a thermal nuclear power source that basically gives off heat, and then that heat is converted into electricity for the rover. So that's different from the solar power of Spirit and Opportunity, for example. So Spirit and Opportunity lasted a long time. They could have gone on forever almost because they had their solar power. But Curiosity and Perseverance will not last forever simply because of that power source. So we will get down to the end of that power source in about 20 years. But we'll also get down to about 50% of it in about 14 years. So basically, we're looking at about a 14-year useful lifetime of the rover, when it'll be able to communicate and do a useful day in the field for us. But
14.
Actually,
I got to say,
well,
14 years. Important.
Yeah, I mean, Curiosity now is coming up to or almost 9 years that it's been on the surface, and it's doing very well still. They did have some problems with their tires that we've now fixed for Perseverance as well. So we have much tougher tires, and we also have a the same power source. So we basically we look at their the way that they're going through their power, and that's what we'd expect for Perseverance as well. But I should mention that if we do last 14 years, that's really important, because we have a follow-on sample return mission planned, and that will at the moment it's planned for 2026, and it will land on Mars at about 2029. So that's about 10 years into, almost 10 years into the mission for Perseverance, and so the power will be going down, but hopefully the rover will still be operating and can hand over samples to the sample return mission.
Okay. Adrian, I want to make sure that we get to some of the questions here. Let me just ask one final question before we go to some of these really interesting questions that people have proposed. Anyhow, let me just ask this. All right, so what you're saying is this thing's going to go around and package up samples, and it'll do that for the next, well, 10 years, by which time, at least in the planning, by which time the follow-up mission will go to Mars and collect the samples that Perseverance has bagged, if you will,
Yeah.
and bring it back to Earth. And that'll take another 18 months or whatever it takes.
Yep.
And then they'll go to labs. So in other words, when it comes to discovering life on Mars, it sounds like the earliest we will see that would be around, I don't know, 2012 or something like that. Sorry, not 2012, 2032.
2032, yes, potentially, if we're reliant upon getting them back into the lab and finding them.
I mean, are you saying that life on Mars will actually be found on Earth?
Yep, that could very well happen. In fact, that would be a quite likely outcome. If, for example, we were able to find stromatolites on the surface that we could check out, and I'll just share an image of a stromatolite just so people sort of know what they are. Let me just see.
Yeah.
But these stromatolites would immediately be able to show us, they'll tell the team, oh, hey, this is something not just interesting, this is something that was, created by life. Okay, can you see that there?
Yes, indeed.
So these stromatolites, these are, they look a little bit like cabbages in the rock. And these two people, Martin Van Kranendonk and Malcolm Walter, are looking at these Australian stromatolites. These are about 2.8 billion year old stromatolites. So they're not quite as old, but they're super old. And I have another older stromatolite. You can see these are smaller, conical shaped stromatolites that look a bit like an egg carton there in the middle.
Yeah,
and they
you should point out
the life that we'll be looking for.
Yeah, so people don't get confused. These stromatolites are in Northwest Australia. These are not stromatolites on Mars. But what you're saying is that if you found features like this on Mars, that short circuits that whole business of bringing samples back to Earth and then finding the Martians here. It would be an early discovery. It would be as if, I don't know, the Viking landers plop down, they turn on their cameras and, somebody's walking toward the camera, or there's a plant or something like that.
Right, exactly, yes. Of course, we're able to rove and check out the most likely places on the surface. And we do have a few places where we've found a mineral called carbonate. In fact, that's one of the things that I'm most interested in my research, is the interactions of carbonate and olivine minerals, which form this. What we're looking at here was carbonate, and then was later on altered to a preserving silica type of minerals. So that procedure would also have to happen on Mars, and we hope that was the case. Or it could just be that Mars is not as harsh on the rocks, and we already have evidence that that's the case by the fact that there is a 3.9 billion year old delta preserved there for us to see.
Yeah. Well, all right, let's get to some of these questions. I would say if you can make concise, insightful answers, and we can get to more of them. Some of them are really.
I'll try.
Well,
try to make them concise. I don't know about the latter. Yeah.
Okay. From Mike. Miba. I don't know if her first initial is A. MIBA. What are the chances that there is current microbial life underground on Mars?
Yes.
In other words, extant life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's definitely a reasonable hypothesis, but that's just something that we haven't been able to investigate because we haven't been able to drill very far into the surface. Perseverance does have a drill on it, and the samples will all be drilled samples to try and get around that thing that we found during Viking. Is you can't just look at soils because they're going to be incredibly irradiated and unfriendly for life, and not preserve the organics that we need to find as biosignatures. So we have a drill. We'll go about a finger length into the surface, and then we'll drill that out. And then each of these samples is about the size of your finger. And then there'll be about 37 of those that we keep in our caching system, and we can drop those off as well if we're worried that we might destroy the rover and so we will be doing a very interesting part of the process for scientists is to decide which samples we're going to take, because 37 is an infinity, and geologists would like to take an infinity of samples, obviously. So that will be a big procedure, and then which ones we'll save and which ones we'll want to put in caches and drop them off and say, hey, that's where the sample should be collected from.
Yeah. I think drone enthusiasts are always, are quite excited about the fact that the Mission 2020 craft has a helicopter on board. And
Right.
by the way, people may not realize that it's tough to make a drone, a helicopter that works on Mars, because the atmosphere is 100 times thinner than it is on Earth. It's like taking your drone to the top of Mount Everest. Probably doesn't work very well. But what's the function of the helicopter when it comes to getting samples? I mean, aside from demonstrating that a helicopter could work on Mars.
Yeah, I think this is a super cool aspect of the proposal, of the project, because this rover is firstly the helicopter is getting slung underneath the rover. So actually, it's like you can sort of a little bit imagine that it's slung underneath there. And that's because we don't want to put it up on top of the rover, which is where they were originally putting it. Because if it was to fail, it might get in the way of instruments or stuff like that. So they put it slung underneath the rover. It's going to get dropped onto the surface. It'll extend its legs. The rover will walk away, and they can, and then the rover will be able to turn around, or at least turn around its video. And we'll get a video feed of the rover commanding the helicopter to go off the ground and do 4 to 5 flights. This is a fantastic thing, because we'll be able to use it, I think, in the future. We'll be able to use it as scientists to learn more about what the formations that are around us. And ideally, we could imagine perhaps the delta, if we land next to the delta is about, it's significantly high, like 100 meters or so, and very difficult for the rover to get up. But if the helicopter is able to get up, then we could look at some of what's above the delta surface, or on top of the delta surface.
Yeah,
so that's like one way we could use it.
It's like having a point man for your expedition, I guess. But it isn't a rechargeable rover, right? I mean, it has 4 or 5 flights, and then that's it.
It has solar power, so in theory, it should be able to operate for a long time. But we're only thinking of it as an experimental part of the mission, and that's why they've been able to get away with a lot of the cutting edge technology. Like, it contains a couple of iPhone cameras on board of it, so it's going to be fantastic for video. But normally NASA wouldn't do that sort of cutting edge stuff. But because it's an experimental craft, they can get away with it.
Are you cleared to say that normally NASA doesn't do cutting edge stuff? All right. Okay. Let's get to some more of these questions. Here's something. In recent days, there was a study published claiming to have revived living microbes aged 100 million years or so. If that's true, wouldn't that push us to experiment, to dig down deeper into the Martian surface and look for living microbes?
It's definitely a possibility. Still, 100 million years is only 100 million years, as a geologist could only say, because, I mean, the rocks that we're going to are 3.9 billion years, and those billions do really matter when you're looking for organics or DNA on the surface. Reviving something at 100 million years and reviving something at 3 billion years is very, very, very different. I know to us it seems like a stupid analogy, but it actually is. Because unless things are preserved for in a pristine state, and they never are after for 3 billion years. So while we might be able to look for something that's 100 million years, for us, or for geologists of Martian ilk, that's just like the last time that it may have flowed with lava or something like that. So it's like the blink of an eye. We've only been present for like 2 million years of that period, but that still is just a blink of an eye in terms of the Martian geology and Earth geology as well. And so it's going to be very hard if we are able to. It's going to be very hard to revive the Martian life if we find it there, or signatures of it.
Well, I don't think the question was so much about reviving Martian life, although that would be something that I don't know, that would make a good movie script to see if you can revive them, Bob. But I think that the point is that, you know, Martian life may have survived to the present, but your point is that 100 million years isn't really very long compared to the amount of time since there was life there. And it's like saying, well, maybe we'll find living pterodactyls or living tyrannosauri if we just dig down long enough, because, you know, some life can live for a long time. So you're saying, no, it's been dead for a long time, unless it's somewhere that we haven't been able to look.
Yeah, I certainly take the point that we could be looking for extant life only, but we could be looking underneath the surface of Mars for extant life in places where life has retreated to, for example, because the surface of Mars is cold and dry now, but beneath the surface, it's still warm and it's still hot and it's still protected. Life would find it quite manageable beneath the surface of Mars. Even extreme life on Earth could quite happily live underneath the surface of Mars. We know that, but we don't have the technology at the moment on the surface to drill down deep enough.
One more question from the viewers, and this one is from Guy. Would Mars be protected if life is found? I may extend that question a little bit. I mean, suppose it turns out that, yeah, there actually is some extant life, some living life, microbes down, you know, 3 meters or 30 meters on Mars. That's not going to happen with this experiment. But suppose we were to find that, and that it was all over the place. It wasn't just this one place. It was in many places around Mars. Would we say, okay, all hands off Mars, we're going to turn it into an international park? Or would we say, well, you know, Mars is for humans?
Yeah, that's definitely something. I mean, that'd be a nice problem to have, I think, to decide, or to have that knowledge that there was Mars life to start with, but then to have the opportunity to also give Mars back to the Martians. I think we'd have to discuss that with other people who have interest in sending humans to Mars, such as SpaceX. They would have some sort of they would have ideas and designs on humans being on the surface, and they may not be able to have living Martians on the surface as well. But then again, those samples, or those that biology may have lived in a time when it was warmer and wetter, or they may not actually be able to populate the surface. They may just be subsurface inhabitants, in which case, you know, maybe that we just leave them to our own designs, and SpaceX and Elon Musk can inhabit the top 200 meters, and they inhabit what's beneath.
Yeah, it's like the microbes underground today, right? They say there are microbes a mile deep here, just in my backyard. So they say, well, finally, okay, Adrian, we're going to let you go, let our viewers go. But one last question, and that is this. All right, I mean, you're going to sit there and do something between now and February 18th, right? When it pops down, that's going to be an exciting day. And then, you know, it'll be a while before we could even possibly get evidence that there's life on Mars. But suppose it happens. Suppose we finally do find life on Mars. Microbial life, yes, but that Mars once had biology. Why do we care?
Well, firstly, we have to find out whether it's biology that's related to us. And if it's not, then the significance of having a different life in our solar system is, I think, the key. Because if life has evolved in two different places in our solar system that we can reach and that we have evidence for, then you'd think that life should be everywhere. Whereas if it's life that is only a derivative of ours, if it has DNA, maybe it was sent there by meteorites, and that you could say is not quite as interesting. Certainly it seems to be something that we couldn't then say that life is everywhere. But if we do find life that's completely unrecognizable, other than to say that it's life that, you know, by some standards of our imagination, then that would be truly a life-changing, a species-changing sort of event, I think, because we'd then begin to know that life must be common throughout the universe.
Okay, so 2021 could go down as the year in which Homo sapiens found out that there's biology elsewhere. Adrian Brown, I want to thank you very much for being with us. And by the way, if you haven't gotten enough of Adrian Brown, and I'm sure most of you have not, you get another opportunity, because next Wednesday is SETI Talks. And Adrian will be one of the featured. Well, I guess you're the moderator, right?
The moderator,
And tell us who the scientists are.
Janice Bishop and Pablo Sobron will be my guests, I guess.
Yes, they will. And those are both scientists at the SETI Institute. You should just go to the SETI Institute website, SETI.org, and sign up for the newsletter, check things out there, and join in on Wednesday and hear more about life on Mars. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. This has been fun. And Adrian, I think you ought to give that hardware behind you back to NASA.
I'll see if I can send it. It might arrive a little bit late in the mail these days.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.